The email came at midnight, a cruel ping that shattered Ethan Caldwell's dreams of a quiet weekend in New Orleans. Booking error. Room 214 overbooked, it read, followed by a curt apology from the hotel and a promise to resolve the issue upon arrival. Ethan, exhausted from a grueling week at his Chicago law firm, tossed his phone onto the bed, cursing the universe for its knack for chaos. He arrived at the Bellevue Hotel in the French Quarter under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. The lobby was a whirlwind of guests, tourists clutching Mardi Gras masks, locals arguing over reservations. Ethan, with his neatly packed duffel and a headache pulsing at his temples, approached the front desk, expecting a quick fix. Instead, the clerk, a harried woman named Marie, delivered the blow. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but your room's been double booked. You'll have to share with another guest." "Share?" Ethan's voice cracked, his lawyer's composure slipping. "I booked this months ago. I need my own space." Marie's eyes darted to her screen. "The other guest is already checked in. Mr. Javier Torres. He's agreed to share, and we've upgraded you both to a suite at no extra cost." Ethan's jaw tightened. A stranger? In his room? He pictured a loud, obnoxious frat bro, or worse, someone who'd steal his laptop while he slept. "This is unacceptable," he started, but Marie cut him off with a practiced smile. "It's Mardi Gras weekend, sir. Every hotel in the city is booked solid. It's this or nothing." Grumbling, Ethan took the keycard and trudged to the elevator. Room 214 was on the top floor, a supposed suite that better be worth the hassle. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to escape, to drown out the noise of his life. The endless depositions, his mother's relentless calls about settling down, and the gnawing loneliness he'd never admit aloud. The door to 214 swung open, and Ethan froze. A man stood by the window, silhouetted against the vibrant chaos of Bourbon Street below. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck. He turned, and Ethan's breath caught. The man's eyes, a deep hazel, held a quiet intensity, like he was sizing Ethan up, but not judging. Yet. "You must be Ethan," the man said, his voice low, with a faint Texas drawl. He extended a hand. "Javier Torres. Sorry about the mix-up." Ethan shook his hand, noting the calluses on Javier's palm. "Yeah, well, I'm not thrilled about it either," he muttered, dropping his duffel on the floor. The room was spacious, 2 queen beds, a sleek bathroom, and a balcony overlooking the quarter, but it felt suffocating with a stranger in it. Javier raised an eyebrow, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I don't bite, man. I'm just here for the festival. Street photographer, chasing the perfect shot." He gestured to a camera on the desk, its lens glinting under the soft light. Ethan nodded stiffly, unpacking his suitcase with military precision. A photographer? Great. Probably some free-spirited type who'd keep him up all night talking about art. He was already regretting not fighting harder for a refund. "So, lawyer, huh?" Javier said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Your suit gave it away. You here to sue Mardi Gras for being too loud." Ethan snorted despite himself. "I'm here to get away from work, not add to it." Javier's smile widened, and Ethan felt a strange flutter in his chest. He ignored it, chalking it up to jet lag. They divided the room like roommates in a dorm. Ethan took the bed by the window, Javier the one by the door. They agreed on basic rules: no loud music, no hogging the bathroom, no touching each other's stuff. Simple, civilized. But as night fell and the sounds of Mardi Gras seeped through the walls, trumpets blaring, crowds cheering, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this mistake was about to upend his carefully ordered life. The first night was awkward. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of Javier's breathing across the room. The photographer had come back late, smelling of bourbon and street food, his camera slung over his shoulder. He'd mumbled a good night and collapsed onto his bed, still in his jeans. Ethan, in his neatly pressed pajamas, felt like a robot next to Javier's easy chaos. By morning, the tension hadn't eased. Ethan woke to find Javier already gone, his camera missing from the desk. A note scrawled on hotel stationery read, "Out shooting. Back by noon. Don't wait up." Ethan rolled his eyes. Typical. He spent the day exploring the city alone, weaving through crowded streets, dodging beads thrown from balconies. New Orleans was alive, pulsing with color and sound, but Ethan felt detached, like he was watching it all through glass. He was 32, successful, respected, and miserably alone. He hadn't dated in years, not since his last relationship imploded under the weight of his workaholic tendencies. Coming out as gay in college had been liberating, but building a life around it? That was harder. Trust didn't come easily, not when every guy he'd met seemed to want something: status, money, or just a fleeting thrill. Back at the hotel, Javier was sprawled on his bed, editing photos on his laptop. The screen glowed with images of the festival, vibrant masks, dancers mid-twirl, a child clutching a balloon. Ethan paused, drawn in despite himself. "These are good," he admitted, leaning over Javier's shoulder. Javier glanced up, surprised. "Thanks. Been chasing shots like these my whole life. Grew up in El Paso, nowhere near this kind of energy. Makes me feel alive." Ethan nodded, unsure how to respond. Javier's passion was disarming, a stark contrast to his own tightly controlled world. "You do this full-time?" he asked, sitting on his bed. "Mostly," Javier said. "Freelance gigs, some gallery shows. Pays the bills, barely. But it's freedom, you know? No one telling me who to be." Ethan envied that freedom, though he'd never say it. Instead, he changed the subject. "You going out again tonight?" Javier grinned. "Only if you come with me." Ethan blinked. "Me? I'm not exactly the Mardi Gras type." "Come on, lawyer. Live a little. You're in New Orleans, not a courtroom." Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. Maybe it was the city's infectious energy, or maybe it was Javier's crooked smile. They hit the streets together, Javier snapping photos while Ethan trailed behind, loosening up with every step. They shared a po', laughed at a street magician's terrible tricks, and ducked into a bar when the rain finally broke. By the time they stumbled back to the hotel, soaked and giddy, Ethan realized he hadn't thought about work all night. The rain didn't stop the city. If anything, it amplified the chaos, turning New Orleans into a kaleidoscope of wet cobblestones and neon reflections. Ethan and Javier, still buzzing from their night out, woke to a city that refused to slow down. The suite felt less like a battlefield now, the air between them lighter, though Ethan couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way Javier had handed him a beer last night, their fingers brushing, or how he'd laughed when Ethan tripped over a curb, not mocking but warm, like they were already friends. Javier was up first, as usual, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. "You in for round two?" he asked, tying his boots. His voice carried a challenge, daring Ethan to step out of his comfort zone again. Ethan hesitated. He'd planned to spend the day in the hotel, catching up on emails, but the thought of another sterile day made his skin crawl. "Fine," he said, pulling on a jacket. "But no more dive bars. I'm not built for that." Javier's laugh was infectious. "Deal. Let's hit the Garden District. Less chaos, more vibes." They took a streetcar to the Garden District, where oak trees draped with Spanish moss shaded historic mansions. Javier snapped photos of wrought iron gates and blooming magnolias, narrating each shot with a story, some real, some clearly made up. Ethan found himself listening, captivated by Javier's ability to see beauty in the mundane. A cracked sidewalk became a canvas for light, a stray cat, a guardian of secrets. "You see the world differently," Ethan said as they paused by a fountain. "I look at this and see a fountain. You see a whole story." Javier shrugged, adjusting his lens. "It's not about seeing different. It's about looking closer. Everyone's got a story, Ethan. Even you." Ethan's chest tightened. No one had ever said something like that to him. Not his colleagues, not his family. He wanted to brush it off, but Javier's gaze held him, steady and searching. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, the fountain's soft trickle fading into the background. They spent the day wandering, talking about everything and nothing. Javier's childhood in El Paso, Ethan's pressure cooker life in Chicago. Javier confessed he'd left home at 18, escaping a family that didn't understand his dreams or his identity. Took me years to say I'm gay out loud, he admitted, kicking a pebble. Even longer to feel okay about it. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. I came out in college. Thought it'd fix everything. Spoiler, it didn't. People still expect you to fit their mold. Javier's eyes softened. Yeah, but you don't have to. Not here, not now. The words lingered, heavy with possibility. That night, back at the hotel, they sat on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine Javier had bought from a corner store. The city hummed below, alive with music and laughter. Ethan felt a pull toward Javier, a dangerous warmth he hadn't felt in years. He pushed it down, blaming the wine, the city, anything but the truth. The next day, the hotel's mistake felt less like a curse. Ethan woke to find Javier sketching in a notebook, his camera resting beside him. The sight, Javier's quiet focus, the morning light catching his profile, stirred something in Ethan he couldn't name. You draw too? Ethan asked, sitting up. Javier flipped the notebook shut, a little sheepish. Just doodles. Helps me think. Let me see, Ethan said, surprising himself with his boldness. Javier hesitated, then handed over the notebook. The pages were filled with quick sketches, street scenes, faces, and, to Ethan's shock, a rough outline of himself, laughing, from the night before. The lines were simple but captured something raw, something Ethan hadn't seen in himself in years. You're good, Ethan said, his voice quieter than he meant. Really good. Javier's cheeks flushed. Thanks. I see you, you know. You're more than the suit. Ethan's heart thudded. He wanted to say something, anything, but the word stuck. Instead, he handed the notebook back, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither pulled away. They spent the day at the riverfront, Javier teaching Ethan how to frame a shot, their hands grazing as they passed the camera. Ethan felt like a teenager, nervous and alive, every touch electric. He wasn't naive. He knew what this was, this pull, this heat. But he also knew Javier was leaving in a few days, back to his nomadic life. Ethan's world didn't work like that. He had cases, deadlines, a life that didn't bend. That night, the festival reached its peak. The streets were a riot of color, costumes, and music. Javier dragged Ethan into the crowd, and for once, Ethan didn't resist. They danced, clumsy and laughing, to a brass band's wild rhythm. When Javier grabbed his hand to pull him through the throng, Ethan didn't let go. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world stopped. Back in the room, the air was thick with unspoken words. Javier sat on his bed, camera in hand, watching Ethan with that same searching look. You ever just let go? He asked, voice low. Ethan's mouth went dry. I don't know how, he admitted. Javier set the camera down and crossed the room. He stopped inches from Ethan, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint spice of his cologne. Maybe it's time you learned, Javier whispered. Ethan's heart pounded. He wanted to step back, to retreat to safety, but his feet wouldn't move. Javier's hand brushed his cheek, tentative, waiting. And then, without thinking, Ethan leaned in. Their kiss was slow, searing, a collision of need and fear. When they pulled apart, Ethan's hands were shaking. I don't do this, he said, voice rough. I can't. Javier's smile was soft, sad. You don't have to do anything, Ethan. Just be here. With me. They didn't sleep that night, not in the way Ethan feared. They talked, sprawled on the balcony, sharing stories of heartbreak and hope until the sky turned pink. Ethan felt raw, exposed, but for the first time in years, he felt seen. Morning light spilled into room 214, painting the walls gold. Ethan woke first, his head foggy from wine and the weight of last night's kiss. Javier was still asleep, one arm flung across his pillow, his face soft in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. He slipped out to the balcony, needing air, needing to think. The city was quieter now, nursing its Mardi Gras hangover, but Ethan's mind was a storm. What was he doing? He wasn't this guy, reckless, open, falling for a stranger he'd known for 3 days. Javier stirred, joining him on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee from the room's machine. You look like you're solving world peace out here, he teased, handing Ethan a cup. Ethan managed to smile. Just processing. Javier nodded, leaning against the railing. Last night was a lot. I get it. No pressure, okay. But there was pressure, not from Javier, but from Ethan's own heart. He wasn't built for fleeting connections. Every relationship he'd had ended in disappointment, either his or theirs. Javier, with his easy charm and wandering life, was a risk Ethan didn't know how to take. They spent the day apart, an unspoken agreement to give each other space. Ethan wandered the French market, browsing stalls of spices and trinkets, but his thoughts kept drifting to Javier, his laugh, his sketches, the way his touch had felt like a lifeline. By afternoon, he found himself at a small bookstore, picking up a photography collection he thought Javier might like. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a confession. When he returned to the hotel, Javier was there, editing photos again. The sight of him, focused and alive, made Ethan's resolve waver. He handed Javier the book, his voice gruff. Saw this. Thought of you. Javier's eyes lit up, flipping through the pages. This is wow. Thanks, Ethan. He looked up, and the air between them crackled again. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Ethan said, the words heavy with truth. That night, they went to a jazz club, tucked away in a dimly lit alley. The music was raw, soulful, and Ethan felt it in his bones. Javier's knee brushed his under the table, and this time, Ethan didn't pull away. They talked over the music, their words weaving around each other. Javier's dreams of a cross-country photo project. Ethan's quiet hope to find something beyond his career. When the band played a slow number, Javier stood, offering his hand. Dance with me, he said, not a question. Ethan's heart raced, but he took Javier's hand. They swayed in the corner, awkward at first, then closer, their bodies finding a rhythm. Ethan's walls, the ones he'd built so carefully, began to crumble. He didn't care who saw them, didn't care about the whispers or the glances. For once, he just was. Back at the hotel, the tension broke again. This time, it was Ethan who closed the distance, kissing Javier with a hunger that surprised them both. They fell onto Javier's bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises, but it wasn't just physical. It was trust, vulnerability, a connection Ethan hadn't known he could feel. When they finally slept, Ethan's head on Javier's chest, he felt anchored for the first time in years. The next morning brought reality crashing in. Javier's flight was in 2 days, Ethan's in 3. The booking mistake that had thrown them together was temporary, a glitch in the universe's code. Over breakfast at Café du Monde, powdered sugar dusting their fingers, Ethan broached the subject. What happens when we leave? He asked, staring at his beignet. Javier's smile faded. I don't know. I'm not good at plans, Ethan. I go where the road takes me. Ethan's stomach twisted. And I'm the opposite. My life's planned to the minute. This, he gestured between them, doesn't fit. Javier reached across the table, his hand covering Ethan's. Maybe it doesn't have to fit. Maybe it just is. But Ethan needed more than that. He needed certainty, promises, a future he could map out. Javier's world was fluid, untethered, and Ethan didn't know how to bridge the gap. They spent the day in a fragile truce, exploring the city's quieter corners, a cemetery with crumbling tombs, a park where kids chased pigeons. Javier took fewer photos, his focus on Ethan instead. They laughed, they argued, they stole kisses in the shade of ancient oaks. But the clock was ticking, and every moment felt borrowed. That night, back in the suite, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to Javier's steady breathing, memorizing the sound. He wanted to ask Javier to stay, to try, but the words felt selfish. Javier's life was his art, his freedom. Ethan's was structure, duty. Could they ever meet in the middle? He slipped out of bed, pacing the balcony. The city was still awake, its heartbeat steady, but Ethan felt unmoored. He didn't know how to let go, but he also didn't know how to hold on. When Javier joined him, wrapping a blanket around them both, Ethan leaned into him, letting the warmth anchor him for one more night. Whatever happens, Javier whispered. This was real. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. Yeah, it was. The fourth day in New Orleans dawned with a heaviness Ethan couldn't shake. The suite, once a battleground, then a sanctuary, now felt like a countdown clock. Javier was up early, as always, sketching on the balcony while the city stirred below. Ethan watched him from the doorway, coffee cup in hand, memorizing the way Javier's fingers moved across the page. He wanted to freeze this moment, to keep Javier's quiet focus and the soft morning light forever. But tomorrow, Javier would leave, and Ethan would be alone again. They decided to spend the day at the Audubon Zoo, a change of pace from the festival's frenzy. The zoo was crowded with families, but it offered a strange calm, a bubble where they could pretend time wasn't slipping away. Javier snapped photos of flamingos and a sleepy alligator, narrating their secret lives with a grin. Ethan laughed, but his heart wasn't in it. Every smile, every touch, felt like a goodbye. At the elephant enclosure, Javier turned the camera on Ethan. "Smile, lawyer. You're too serious." Ethan forced a grin, but it faltered. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely. "Letting things just happen." Javier lowered the camera, his expression softening. "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to try." They sat on a bench, watching kids chase bubbles. Javier's hand found Ethan's, their fingers lacing together. "I've been running my whole life," Javier said quietly. "From my family, from expectations. I thought it made me free, but sometimes it just feels empty." Ethan's chest tightened. "I've been running too. From myself, mostly. I thought if I kept everything in order, my job, my life, I'd be okay. But I'm not." Javier's thumb brushed over Ethan's knuckles. "Maybe we're both a little lost. But we found each other, didn't we?" The words were a lifeline, but they also stung. Finding each other was one thing. Keeping each other was another. Ethan wanted to ask Javier to stay, to try for something real, but the fear of rejection held him back. What if this was just a moment for Javier, a story to tell in some future city? That night, they skipped the festival, choosing the quiet of their room instead. They ordered takeout, sprawled on the floor with plates of jambalaya, and talked about the future, not theirs, but the abstract kind. Javier dreamed of a photo series capturing America's hidden corners. Ethan admitted he wanted to take pro bono cases, to do something that mattered. The conversation felt like a bridge, but neither dared cross it fully. When the food was gone, Javier pulled Ethan close, their kisses slow and deliberate, like they were memorizing each other. They moved to the bed, the world shrinking to just them, their breaths, their hands. It wasn't just desire, it was trust, a fragile gift Ethan hadn't realized he'd been starving for. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, the cities hum a distant lullaby. Ethan traced the lines of Javier's tattoo, a small compass on his shoulder. "What's this for?" he asked. Javier's voice was soft. "To remind me there's always a way forward, even when I'm lost." Ethan wanted to say he felt found, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he held Javier tighter, willing the night to last. Morning brought a knock at the door. The hotel manager, apologetic, offered Ethan a new room. Another guest had canceled. Ethan's heart sank. The mistake that had forced them together was fixed, but it felt like a loss. Javier, packing his camera bag, looked up. "You taking it?" Ethan hesitated. A room of his own was what he'd wanted 5 days ago, but now? The thought of sleeping without Javier's warmth was unbearable. "No," he said finally. "I'm good here." Javier's smile was small, but it lit up the room. They spent the day in the French Quarter again, but the magic was tinged with urgency. Javier's flight was tomorrow morning, and every moment felt like sand slipping through their fingers. They wandered through Jackson Square, watched artists paint, and shared a praline under a street lamp. When Javier kissed him in the open, Ethan didn't flinch, didn't care who saw. For the first time, he felt free. But freedom came with a price. That night, as they sat on the balcony, Javier broke the silence. "I don't know how to do this, Ethan. Long distance, plans, all that. It's not my world." Ethan's throat burned. "And my world doesn't bend. I've got cases, deadlines. I can't just follow you." Javier nodded, his eyes distant. "But I don't want to lose this." "Lose you?" The words hung between them, raw and real. Ethan wanted to promise everything. Visits, calls, a future, but he didn't know how. Instead, he took Javier's hand, squeezing it like a vow. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the city's heartbeat their only witness. Javier's last day in New Orleans broke Ethan's heart before it even began. He woke to find Javier already packed, his camera bag by the door, his sketchbook tucked away. The suite felt too big, too empty, despite Javier still being there. Ethan wanted to stop time, to keep this stranger who'd become so much more, but the clock didn't care. They went to the Mississippi River, walking along the levee where steamboats churned through the water. Javier took photos, but his usual chatter was subdued. Ethan felt the weight of their silence, the unspoken question, what now? He wanted to ask Javier to stay, to try for something beyond this week, but the words felt like a trap for both of them. At a quiet spot by the river, Javier stopped, turning to Ethan. I've never met anyone like you, he said, his voice rough. You make me want to stay still, just for a little while. Ethan's heart leapt, then sank. But you won't, will you? Javier looked away, the river reflecting in his eyes. I don't know how to be that guy, Ethan. The one who stays. My life's always been about the next shot, the next city. But you make me question that. Ethan wanted to be angry, to demand more, but he couldn't. Javier's honesty was a gift, even if it hurt. I don't know how to be the guy who chases, he admitted. My life's in Chicago, in courtrooms. I can't just leave. They stood there, the river flowing between them and the truth. Javier reached for Ethan's hand, pulling him close. Then let's have today, he said. Just today. They spent it like it was their last, because it was. They rode a streetcar to the end of the line, ate crawfish etouffee at a hole-in-the-wall diner, and danced in a park to a busker's saxophone. Javier gave Ethan his sketchbook, the one with the drawing of him laughing. Keep it, he said, so you don't forget me. Ethan's throat closed. I couldn't forget you if I tried. That night, they didn't sleep. They lay in bed, talking about the little things, favorite movies, worst dates, the time Javier got lost in the desert and Ethan got stuck in an elevator. They laughed, they kissed, they held each other like the world was ending. And in a way, it was. When dawn broke, Javier's alarm shattered the quiet. He got up, moving slowly, like he was fighting gravity. Ethan watched him pack the last of his things, his chest tight with grief. At the door, Javier turned, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Come with me, he said, half joking, half pleading. One more adventure. Ethan smiled, but it hurt. I can't. You know that. Javier nodded, stepping closer. He kissed Ethan, soft and lingering, then pressed his forehead against Ethan's. Find me if you ever get lost, okay? Ethan couldn't speak. He just nodded, holding Javier until the taxi honked outside. Javier was gone, and room 214 was a tomb. Ethan stayed one more day, but the city felt hollow without Javier's laugh, his camera, his warmth. He wandered the streets, clutching the sketchbook, replaying every moment. The booking mistake had been a gift, a crack in his armor, but now it was over, and he didn't know how to go back. He flew back to Chicago, the sketchbook in his carry-on like a talisman. His apartment was sterile, his life a series of checkboxes. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. But Javier had changed something in him, a spark he couldn't extinguish. He started small, taking a photography class, signing up for a pro bono case. He texted Javier, tentative at first, then daily, sharing snippets of his life. Javier responded, sending photos from his travels, sunsets in Santa Fe, street art in Austin. They talked late into the night, their voices bridging the miles. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Ethan began to dream again, not of cases or promotions, but of a life with room for chaos, for love. 3 months later, Javier called. I'm in Chicago next week, he said, his voice nervous. Got a gallery show. You free? Ethan's heart stopped. Yeah, I'm free. Chicago was gray when Javier arrived, a stark contrast to New Orleans' vibrant chaos. Ethan stood outside the gallery, his palms sweaty despite the autumn chill. He hadn't seen Javier in 3 months, but their late-night calls and texted photos had kept the spark alive. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if the magic of New Orleans was just that? A moment, not a future. The gallery was small, tucked in an artsy neighborhood, its walls lined with Javier's photos. Ethan spotted him across the room, talking to a couple about a shot of a desert sunrise. Javier looked different, still himself, but sharper, like the city had polished his edges. When he saw Ethan, his face broke into a grin that made Ethan's knees weak. "You came," Javier said, pulling him into a hug. He smelled like coffee and cologne, and Ethan wanted to stay there forever. "Of course I came," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Your photos are incredible." They wandered the gallery, Javier explaining each shot, its story, its light, its soul. Ethan listened, but he was really watching Javier, the way his hands moved, the passion in his voice. It was New Orleans all over again, but heavier, because now they knew what they stood to lose. After the show, they went to a diner, sharing fries and stories like no time had passed. Javier talked about his travels, the people he'd met, but his eyes kept finding Ethan's, searching. "I missed you," he admitted, pushing a fry across the plate. "More than I thought I would." Ethan's heart thudded. "I missed you too. Every day." They walked along Lake Michigan, the city's skyline glittering against the water. Javier stopped, turning to Ethan. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "About us. About trying something. I don't know what it looks like, but I want it. With you." Ethan's breath caught. He'd spent months imagining this, but hearing it was different. "My life's here, Javier. Yours isn't. How do we make that work?" Javier took his hand, his grip steady. "We figure it out. Together. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'm saying it's worth it." Ethan wanted to believe him, but fear lingered. He'd built his life on control, on certainty. Javier was the opposite, wild, unpredictable, a storm Ethan couldn't tame. But maybe that was the point. Maybe love wasn't about control. They kissed by the lake, the wind wrapping around them, and for the first time, Ethan let himself hope. Javier stayed in Chicago for a week, crashing at Ethan's apartment. It was messy, imperfect, Javier's clothes strewn across the floor, Ethan's schedule thrown into chaos, but it felt right. They cooked terrible dinners, watched old movies, and made love with a tenderness that left Ethan breathless. When Javier left for his next gig in Seattle, Ethan didn't cry. He held on to the promise of visits, of trying, of building something real. They made it work, piece by piece. Javier came back for weekends. Ethan flew to meet him in Denver, then Portland. They fought sometimes, about distance, about time, but they always found their way back. Ethan started painting, inspired by Javier's sketches, and Javier began planning a photo series in Chicago, a reason to stay longer. 6 months later, Javier got an offer. A gallery in New York wanted a solo show. It meant moving, at least for a while. Over dinner, he told Ethan, his eyes nervous. "I want you to come with me," he said. "Not forever, just for now." Ethan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. New York was a world away from his life, his job, his safety net. But as he looked at Javier, at the man who'd turned his world upside down in a hotel room in New Orleans, he knew his answer. "Okay," he said, smiling. "Let's do it." New York was a beast, all noise and ambition, but Ethan and Javier faced it together. They found a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, its walls paper-thin, but theirs. Ethan took a leave from his firm, picking up freelance legal work while Javier prepped for his show. It wasn't easy. Money was tight. The city was relentless. But every night, falling asleep in Javier's arms, Ethan felt whole. The gallery opening was a triumph. Javier's photos filled the space, each one a story of love, loss, and resilience. Ethan stood by his side, proud and overwhelmed, as strangers praised the man he loved. One photo stopped him cold, a shot of him in New Orleans, laughing in the rain, his guard down. The caption read, "The moment I knew." After the show, they stood on a rooftop, the city sprawling below. Javier pulled Ethan close, his voice soft. "That booking mistake was the best thing that ever happened to me." Ethan laughed, his eyes wet. "Me too." They didn't have all the answers. Javier still craved the road. Ethan still needed structure. But they'd learned to bend, to meet in the middle. They built a life, not perfect, but theirs. And every night, as Ethan drifted off to the sound of Javier's breathing, he knew he'd never sleep alone again. The world hadn't changed. It was still messy, uncertain, full of mistakes. But in that chaos, they'd found each other, and that was enough.